Good afternoon, everyone. Well, welcome to another IT Day Webinar Wednesday. I'm June Rawl, and I'm joined today with Bonnie Gooden. We're so happy that you're able to join us today as we explore a critical domain needed to improve our students' reading comprehension skills. Facilitating today's webinar is no stranger to all of us, Bonnie Gooden. As you know, she's a national consultant for IT Day, and we're really happy to have Bonnie here with us today. Today, Bonnie will help us hone in on some research-based strategies that can help our students increase the ability to discern an author's tone and purpose. So today's webinar, is that the author's tone you hear? Bonnie's going to be able to really walk us through all of this, and we're happy to have her. But before I turn it over to Bonnie, just a few tips to remember during the webinar. As you know, there is a spot for the Q&A. We really want to hear from you. So just look for that Q&A option as it appears on your screen and type in your questions or comments or anything you want to say throughout the webinar. We'll be monitoring it throughout our hour together today. As you know, your microphones are muted, and the webinars are all recorded, and they are archived on the IT Day website. So I'm going to turn it over to Bonnie so we can get started on this great webinar today. Thank you, Bonnie.
Thank you, June, and welcome everybody. Today we're going to explore a number of items. We're going to talk a little bit about identifying purpose, tone, and mood so that our students can better comprehend some of the written texts that they face. And we're also going to talk about a few strategies that are out there that are really effective for our students. And of course, as always, we're going to look at some resources for the classroom. In fact, I'll share with you in just a bit some of the materials that we provided you in the workbook, because some of these materials you'll be able to use in your lessons, as well as handouts for your students. And of course, we don't want to forget the guiding questions. If you're here with us today and you want to share this information with some of your staff, the guiding questions are wonderful to use as they go through the webinar, or as a group, you go through it. As we talk today, I'm going to be asking some questions, and as June said, please share answers with us. So make sure that you know where that Q&A file is so that you can type in. Today we're going to talk about these big ideas, tone, mood, etc., and then provide a few strategies that research says are very effective with our students. Because, you know, sometimes if you're like me, I've often wondered why my students just sometimes didn't get it. Why didn't they get it when they read a comic or humorous piece? Why didn't they get the fact that the writer was being sarcastic? Again, those are the types of things students need to have in order to be better readers. So let's just quickly review things that all of us have encountered once upon a time. We know that for every type of writing piece, there's an author. That person out there with the thoughts and the feelings and the opinions. Everything we read has an author. And we also know that authors write from a personal point of view. When all of us write a letter or write an article or even write a lesson, we're writing from our personal point of view. And we know that that point of view is reflected in both the purpose of the piece of writing. Am I writing to inform or persuade, or maybe even to entertain you a little bit? And the tone, the attitude, and the feeling of the piece. Those are items that oftentimes our students don't quite know. In fact, when I would ask my students once upon a time, what do you think the author was thinking when he or she wrote this piece? And my students, like many students out there, would say, how do I know? I don't know the author. So it is something we need to teach. So let's take a quick look, and I like cartoons. Sorry, we have to let you go, but I'm sure you'll land on your feet. Me too, sir, and may I say, when I land on my feet, I hope your chest is under them. Okay, if I'm looking at this, I have to determine not only the author's purpose, but also the tone of each of the speakers, which one's sincere in what he says, and of course, which one is insincere. Now, to you and me, it's probably pretty simple to see that the boss is extremely insincere, because if he decided to fire this worker, he most likely wasn't sorry at all and could probably care less if the worker would land on his feet and find another job. But there again, as we look at the worker, we do know that the worker is very insincere in his anger at being fired and his wish that, yeah, he wishes he could just stomp on that ex-boss's chest and get some of that anger out. That is indeed the kind of skills that our students need to have, not only for readings each day that they encounter, but also, of course, for the assessment tools that we use. The TABE 1112, the CASAs, and of course the GED test. Those are the kinds of things that they have to be able to understand. But first things first. When we look at purpose, of course, our students need to understand that purpose is the author's reason for writing. Very simply, why is the author writing something? And so, not a big deal. But if you ask your students, what are the major reasons an author writes? That may be a little more difficult. And so one of the things to teach, of course, are the words and a short explanation. And although there are many reasons an author writes, most of the time our books and our materials will talk about three major purposes. To inform, of course, sometimes we call it expository text, which is providing information about a subject. And since we have so much more nonfiction in our assessment tools, of course, there is a lot of expository text, and our students need to understand that. The other thing that sometimes we see both in nonfiction and fiction is persuasive, convincing that reader to agree with what the author's point of view is. Oh my goodness, we have that word point of view again. And then again, to entertain. Usually we see entertaining in, again, narrative or fiction text, but remember, sometimes we may also see it in nonfiction. So students need to first understand the words. Once they understand the words, then again, they have to determine which is which, and that takes a lot of practice. If our students are seeing different types of text and they can answer the questions, does it make arguments, does it give facts, then it's much easier for them to see, does it entertain, persuade, or inform? But there's so much to this process, and we haven't even really gotten to tone yet. So as you're teaching things, what I always had an issue with was, as I was teaching something even as simple as what I thought purpose was, most of the materials I had were providing me with very large pieces of text. And we all know that if we're going to teach things like purpose, point of view, tone, and mood, we just can't start with a 5-page piece of nonfiction text. First of all, we know that our students will close up and shut down, but we also know that it's very difficult for them to find those ideas in that complex of text. So as we're talking today, I want you to remember and think about your own materials. As you're teaching purpose, point of view, tone, and mood, are you indeed moving from simple to complex? Are the materials you're using starting with simple to complex? Or do they jump in halfway through this little chart here, maybe short paragraphs? If they do, step back for a moment. Step back and see, can you first engage students in finding purpose, point of view, tone, or mood by providing pictures or advertisements, or comics like we just used, or even a sentence. And you'll notice with complexity that nonfiction, of course, is more complex than fiction. So whatever you're teaching and how you're teaching it, make sure that whatever materials you use do start from simple to complex. A word to the wise. So how do we start with something that can be simple? Well, if I'm looking at the author's purpose, maybe with students, I even start with something like this, where what they're looking at are book covers. So this is your first question. Take a look at that first book, Sociology. By just looking at that cover, do you think the primary purpose of this particular author is to inform, which is A, B, to persuade, or C, to entertain? Go ahead and type in your answers in the Q&A for me. Well, we have a number of answers, but it looks like A won. And if you did select A, yes, you are correct. The purpose of this particular one is probably to inform. Okay, let's take a look at the next one, the overspent American. What do you think that one is? And yes, we got a lot of B's immediately. Okay, last but not least, Dave Barry's Money Secrets. Why is there a giant eyeball on the dollar? Do you think Dave Barry wants to inform, to persuade, or to entertain? Which one do you think? And fantastic. Boy, we have some quick folks out there, June, and they're saying that probably this one is to entertain. Now, you may have said that one is to persuade. Yeah, probably. But I think knowing the fact that Dave Barry's sitting there looking like Washington, it probably is much more of an entertainment piece. So with purpose, we start with something simple and we move on. But it's not enough just to know author's purpose. We also need to know author's point of view. An author's point of view is just a little more complex for us because most of our students can figure out that the first person narrative, all I have to see is a lot of eyes. And I know, oh my goodness, the narrator is that central character and that character is involved in telling us the story. So I see a lot of eyes for first person. You know, even second person usually is not difficult for our students to understand because second person generally has a lot of yous in the text. You walk down the stairs, you do this. And so they look at second person narration and they go, I got it. But we know that more complex materials have more than first and second person. And so as we're teaching point of view, we do need to make sure that we don't just teach third person, but that we teach the three different modes of third person: objective, limited, and omniscient. Wow, we've got some big words there. Do our students need to know that? Yes, they do. We've seen questions on higher levels of the TABE as well as questions on the GED test that do talk about the three different types of point of view. So if we're looking at it, objective, we can kind of connect that, where the narrator, the person who's telling the story, doesn't reveal any of the character's thoughts or feelings. The narrator is objective. With third person limited, again, the narrator at this point reveals those thoughts and feelings of a character through explicit narration, telling us kind of what that person's doing so that we can infer. And then, of course, we have the omniscient narrator, who is going to reveal more than one character's internal workings, that type of point of view, that narrator sees all. So as you're looking again at your materials, is point of view being taught with first person, second person, and third person in those three major modes? If not, that's something you're going to want to look at in the classroom. As you're teaching point of view, and remember, we haven't even touched the author's tone yet, because these lead into it. So as you're teaching point of view, putting it into practice, you'll want to make sure that the students look for the author's feelings, thoughts, and opinions as they pinpoint that, and that they untangle that third person point of view. As they look at it, they say, okay, teacher, It's not first person, it's not the I, it's not second person, it's not the you. I know it's third person, but which one is it? And so here again, another skill that we need to make sure our students have before we even really get into tone and mood. And how do we do that? Again, reading a range of text. Let's face it, point of view is very different in these two photos. That rotten wolf tried to eat us, the three little pigs point of view, versus the wolf, I was framed, I just wanted to borrow a cup of sugar. It's all in point of view. Okay, but what we were talking about that this particular webinar is going to be about are things like the author's tone. So let's think about it for a moment. We've got all of this terminology and it can be very confusing. So let me ask you, if you had to tell me the difference between voice, tone, and mood, how would you distinguish between the three so that your students really understand that there's a difference? So I'm going to just wait a moment and see if someone out there can give me a quick overview of what's the difference. Okay, let me simplify it just a little bit and let me ask you, how would you describe, I'm going to go ahead and just cut back because one of you has given me a great definition. Tone is how the author conveys the information. Mood's the emotions the text evokes in the reader. Fantastic, yes. Tone belongs to the author. Mood belongs to the reader. Fantastic answer. Give yourself a pat on the back for that one because you are exactly right. And although that should seem easy, for many of our students, that doesn't work so well. They just have no clue what is happening there. So let's go ahead and continue on and see a little more about these areas and the problem with tone, because we know students often don't know what that means. And we also know that they may be able to know the definition, just like you did, but they don't know how to apply it to a text. They also may think tone means the author's attitude or voice. They don't understand it reflects the speaker or narrator, and they may even confuse it with mood. But we also know that students often can only recognize it on a basic glaring level, like when a speaker's sad or happy. They don't understand some of the other tone words. So they see it as that consistent attitude that's out there, but they struggle to see how it changes or shifts. So let's just reiterate a little bit. Voice is the author's style or personality. You got that one right. Fantastic. Tone's how the author or speaker feels about the subject. And again, the mood is how the reader's supposed to feel when reading the work. So we've got the narrator, tone and voice, and we have the reader with, again, as we're going there. And I think we're hearing someone come through, Joseph.
Yes, Bonnie, can you confirm you're still sharing? The screen stopped sharing.
Oh, okay.
Attendees, bear with us. We're going to get the screen back to appear. 1 second, please.
And let's make sure we're there. Okay, are you seeing it now?
Yes, we are.
Fantastic. Thank you for letting me know. Okay, one more time. Voice, the author's style or personality. Tone, how the author or speaker feels about the subject. And mood, the reader. So what do we do? Again, let's think back to that little chart. We want to start out with what students know. And quite honestly, most of our students know that phrase. In fact, as parents, they've probably said it. Don't you use that voice. Watch your tone. I'm not in the mood. So as we're looking at teaching these things, start with something real. For those of you who know me, my first degree was music, so I just could not give up not using Mozart as a child. And if you want the answer to that one, text me later. So we start that route. Okay, I want you to take just about 30 seconds for me. And if you were to tell a student, watch your tone, or that tone is not appropriate, or don't use that tone with me, what would you be referencing? Definitely. You would be referencing their speaking voice, what they're actually saying. And that's where we start, because the attitude of the person or the speaking voice really is what we're dealing with. That is the writer's personality that comes through. And tone, don't use that tone with me, it's very similar to how we speak. So I can speak with a very happy tone. I can speak with a very angry tone. Or my tone can be extremely sad, and all will show through. The difference when they're reading is they can't infer because they can't hear the author. So they do indeed have to infer. So as we're teaching tone, there's a number of things here again that our students need to understand, especially at the higher levels, especially at those levels such as ABE 3 and 4, the higher levels of ESOL, and definitely at that GED prep level. Our students need to understand diction, whether it's a denotative or connotative meaning, more in just a moment. They need to understand imagery, what's coming through the senses, and we'll talk more about that at a later webinar. They need to know about the details, the facts, descriptions that are there. They need to understand the language that's being used, not just a few bits of diction, but all the different types of language that's being used, and they need to understand syntax. Is the sentence length long? Is it using very complex sentences? What type of punctuation is being used? All of this goes into tone, and you may say, but by now, well, I thought I just had to teach happy, sad, etc. Well, at the lowest levels, yes, but at higher levels, these are the kinds of skills that also have to be taught for tone. Quickly, denotative versus connotative. Big words, one's dictionary meaning, one is the secondary meaning. For example, if I show this, what's the first thing that comes in your mind? I show this particular thing. What's the first thing that you think about? Definitely. I've got it right there, a stop sign. Well, if I'm looking at the dictionary meaning, what I may say it is a red octagon. But you're right. I infer, because I know this, its secondary meaning is that sign, indicates danger, indicates stopping. So we've got the dictionary meaning versus the connotative, and most of you immediately came up with that second meaning. Our students oftentimes are much more literal, and they're going to say, it's a red shape. Okay, what's this? It's not a trick question, I promise. Yes, it is a snake. That's that denotative meaning. There again, we're looking at a snake. those scaly, legless things. In fact, June and I were talking about snakes earlier. One just got into my husband's boat and into Tammy's car today. And so when they started talking about that snake, it wasn't so much that it was a snake, but they were coming up with that evil or untrustworthy thing. And so that's that connotative meaning. Those kinds of things are very, very difficult for our students, oftentimes, or very often for some of our ESOL students who they take everything so literally, and we need to lead them into the next level. So it's all in the tone, whatever the author's tone is saying. So let's take a look at a very, I should say, somewhat complex sentence. And I'm going to show you 3 different sentences, and your job is to determine for me what the tone is. So here's the sentence. This place may be shabby, but since both of my children were born while we lived here, it has a special place in my heart. What tone is being used by this particular author? Is this author encouraging, sentimental, or determined? And you'll notice I didn't put much tone into my voice for a specific reason. And you all have it, sentimental. Even though I didn't put a sentimental sound, you got the fact that that special place in my heart shows such tender emotions. How about this one? This isn't the greatest apartment in the world, but it's not really that bad. And for those of you who said A, accepting, yes. Now, I could probably say it in a cynical manner, but my students need to look at it's not really that bad, because that does show that this author is very tolerant or accepting of what's occurring. You can see now already how students truly have to figure out a little more with tone. Here's the last one. If only there were some decent jobs out there, I wouldn't be reduced to living in this miserable dump. A, cheerful, B, bitter, or C, threatening. You guys are getting very quick at this. And yes, this writer is bitter. We've got a miserable dump. Here again, it's all about teaching our students words and how they denote tone. So, teaching tone, research is pretty clear. They talk about repetitive practice, that it's not something that's going to happen in one day. And so the research is looking, and it's very strong that as we teach it, we first have students, and of course we're going to want to model it first, but have students circle the words that reflect what the speaker's feeling or thinking, and characterize how that word choice and sentence structure influence the author's attitude. If an author has very short sentences, stop right there. I'm tired. That's going to give a much different tone than that more musical sound of, after I do this, I'm really tired, so I'm going to, type of thing. And then we want students, after they've circled those words, to look at a tone sheet to see what words correspond to the evidence they've had. And of course, this is what they call a forward design, where we're starting by having students find the evidence, the words, the diction, the syntax, the tone sheet, in order to go to that final conclusion. Research strongly suggests that our students learn better this manner, forward design. It's also important to realize that although we'll want to use lists when we're teaching tone, they should be used as references, not for memorization. Having students just memorize a whole list of words is not going to get them any better at identifying tone. And finally, as we are teaching tone in our classroom, after we've used that repetitive practice with a forward design, after we've worked with the list, we want to make sure that they understand that shifts matter, because most written work doesn't have just one tone. If we're getting into short paragraphs into text, students need to be able to closely read and see that, oh my goodness, this author starts out with this tone and ends with this tone. We don't want to do shifts until our students have that proficiency and they can recognize tone, because at that point, we're going to start doing a backwards design, where students identify the tone first and then they look for the evidence. But there again, that is after they've been very comfortable and very successful with this particular process. There's lots and lots of examples of words that describe tone. In fact, I'll show you in just a moment that you have a number of lists provided to you, so that if you don't have a tone list that you can just pass out and use with students, here's a few that you can choose from. So we've got, first of all, the forward design with lots of repetition, lots of ways to use it. We talked about we need to start with simple things and then we move to complex. But there's another thing that many of our students have difficulty with, and that is irony. Irony is a tone. And we don't want to teach irony, again, until a little higher level, but our students do face irony all the time. If someone says, I feel terrible today, or terrific today, when they are sick, they're using verbal irony. And so, like I said, our students do encounter it, but when they get into the reading process, they find this very difficult. But here again, a skill we have to teach. And so here again, what's said versus what you really mean, one type of tone called irony. And because this is a higher level skill or tone, you won't see a whole lot of materials who say, the author has an ironic tone, or this is irony. Students do need to infer that skill. Where do we start? Again, I would start with something more simplistic that they can see, such as a cartoon. Start easy, have students read the cartoon, and try to determine, can they see the irony? Little girls saying, nobody's commented on my wearing a ponytail instead of pigtails this morning. Still no comments from anyone. Come on, folks, notice my new do. The day is almost over and nobody has said a word about my ponytail. Don't they see how good it looks? So, people are so self-absorbed. Why is it ironic? Because this little girl sees everyone else is self-absorbed, and the bottom line is she's completely self-absorbed. A nice, easy way to start out with irony. From there, I'm going to do what the research tells me. I'm going to move to real-world short phrases. While standing in a long, slow line at a supermarket or bank, you might say to people in line with you, my, this is exciting. What's the irony? Of course. The irony is, it's the last thing I want to do, and it is not exciting at all. It is just the opposite, boring. If a friend arrives at your place 2 hours late, you might say, well, thanks for showing up on time. These are things that students encounter all the time, and you can see that teaching irony does not have to be only in higher order texts, but can be taught at this particular level. So we've got a couple strategies for tone, but one other thing I want to just mention is we don't want it to be just a straight reading lesson. Remember that reading and writing are a very integrated process. And even though oftentimes we'll assess students only on the reading portion of a test, we also want them to have writing skills. They need them, even if they don't need them on certain assessment tools, they need them in their real world life. And so we need to teach integrated reading and writing from the lowest levels of teaching, from ABE, literacy, lowest levels of ESOL, all the way through. So how do we integrate it and teach tone? We can start out with a sentence read, where here again, I am a student at Central Adult Education. Wow, that's simplistic. It's a neutral sentence. I have no clue whether this person is happy, unhappy, sarcastic. I mean, I just don't know. But I can give that to my students as a simple activity, and at the lowest level, maybe they want to create a photo collage or cartoon to illustrate a specific tone that they're going to use with this sentence. Or I can have them rewrite that sentence, and I can have them use a different tone. And here again, adding a few words can really make the difference. From that simple, neutral sentence, I want to move students to taking a passage from a poem and rewriting it using a different tone, or a short passage from a story and having them rewrite it with a different tone. And then finally, a passage from a nonfiction article and then having them rewrite it and using a different tone. If they can apply it, then they're going to be much better at identifying it. So that's a few ideas from the research talking about how do we integrate tone into our reading and writing sections from a very low level all the way up. But there's another word that gets confused by our students, and that's mood. Again, probably the easiest route to introduce it is to bring it into a real world situation. Have your students think back on the past week and what different moods they had. Well, I can tell you in this last week, I've had a really excitement. I mean, my mood, I was just ecstatic because we have a new grandbaby. But I can also tell you that I was just distressed because, you know, I had an issue with the car. So we have a lot of different moods. And then I was just so pleased when something happened as well. So have students start out with real world, and it's just a quick and easy way to start a lesson. Then from there, your students need to understand that mood is indeed that overall feeling or emotion created in the reader. And the power of the pen, as the statement says, can move mountains, because authors do move our readers' moods through their choice of words and level of detail. So as we read, as we have our students read, they need to also identify for you, not only the author's tone, but how did it make them feel? Okay, your turn. Take a look at this short little passage and read it to yourself. And when you're done reading it, type in for me, what mood do you have or did you have after you read this? So I'm going to be quiet for a moment. I have some great words out there. Anxious, fearful, fear, frightened, terrified, afraid, nervous. Lots of great words. And that's an important thing with both tone and mood, is oftentimes there are a number of synonyms for mood and a lot of synonyms for tone. So as you're working with it, make sure that if a student has a word that's not exactly what was in the book, is it a synonym for it? Here again, the mood that I have may be just slightly different than the mood you have, but it should all kind of go around this fearful, terrified kind of mood. It's kind of that Edgar Allan Poe. One strategy that you can also use when you're teaching mood is to use mood questions. Mood questions are things as simple as, what's the mood of the selection? Or if your students are given a list of emotion words, having them choose one that suggests the mood. Or again, what mood is the author creating? Or how does the character feel? Or what feeling does the language in the sentence or phrase primarily express? From the simple to the more complex. It's all about mood. So we've got 4 different areas that we've talked about today, but the question is, why do I even need to teach it? Why is it important? Well, first and foremost, tone plays a really important role in reading comprehension. Evaluating the author's tone really does allow the reader to engage with the text in a deeper way and better understand it. At this point, we're often calling it close reading. We also know that if students know the tone, they're better able to determine the author's attitude towards the subject and topic. We also know that they are more apt to uncover the intent of the words. Are the words negative? Are the words positive? Or are the words, like the student went to the adult ed program, somewhat neutral? The other thing that identifying author's tone helps readers do is to check personal biases and prejudices. When we know the author's tone on a certain item, we can check, is that the same way I feel? And of course, we don't want to forget that these reading comprehension skills are assessed on the TABE 11 and 12. I know as this new test has come out, we've all had some real concerns about what do we need to teach? What's the most important thing? And we're going to go back to this chart that we've used in past webinars and understand that items like tone, mood, point of view, and voice all come under the area of craft and structure on the TABE 11-12. And when we look at this chart, we can see that from level E through level A, somewhere between 32 to 42% of the questions are in this specific area. So for the purpose of assessment, as well as improved reading comprehension, these four items are very, very important for us to teach. And when we look at the standards, and I don't expect you to read all of these, but just to get kind of a feel, we're looking at some of the purpose of text. We see words like point of view. We even see connotative, figurative. We see all types of words that we've just talked about. So you may have said earlier on, why in the world did she use connotative, blah, blah, blah? Well, it's there. And when we look down towards the bottom, you'll notice that we have things like satire and sarcasm and irony. And yes, irony and sarcasm have some similarity. Irony being more of that we say something which is just the opposite. Sarcasm, again, a very similar skill. And when even we look at just a couple sample questions that I found in the TABE 11 and 12 practice questions. Again, we've got author's attitude. We have author's purpose. And again, a point of view. All the types of things that we've covered in this particular webinar so far. So let's put it all together as we take a look back at some of the things we need to do in our classroom. First of all, starting with visuals. You know, I love some of the pictures, and you can already not only identify the author's tone, but you can feel the mood you get from those two photos. If you've never looked at the cartoon by George Svarnas, Being Five, it's hilarious. It's about a little guy who's 5, and he's kind of a tech guru. But here again, a great way to get started with teaching tone, because it's very, very easy to see what the tone here is. So as we're looking at comics, advertisements, photographs, think about some of the questions that you'll want to use as you're starting with visuals, such as just specifically, what's the tone? What's the mood, and how do you know? What images, words, ideas help to reinforce? All I have to do is look at that cartoon and how that little guy is jumping, etc., to know what type of tone that author has and how it makes me feel. And again, that next level up, What would enhance or exaggerate the tone to make it more specific? Is there something this particular author, artist could do to make it even more? So we always want to start with visuals. Then we want to go on to written text, from sentences to longer passages. And you know what? For many of our students, songs, movies, TV shows, that can also teach tone and mood, and they are great resources. And all we really need to do is play a song, have them read a lyric, and have them identify mood or atmosphere, the evidence of the mood, the tone or attitude, and the evidence of the tone. A great way to implement this in the classroom. And last but not least, research tells us we need repetitive practice, because through repetition, skills are built, and using lots of different types of text. Here again, oftentimes in our materials, they cover tone, they cover point of view, and then it's gone. We never see it again. List always as references, not for rote memorization, and down the road, making sure that shifts do matter, and our students are able to identify different tones throughout an author's work. So, lots of different ideas, but where can you find more? So I want to just take a few moments to do a couple things. Take a look at the resources from the workbook and the web, and talk a little bit more about what's coming your way. So first of all, I'm going to go to the workbook because I want to just point out a couple things to you. As we look at the workbook, and you have a copy of this, or you could have downloaded a copy if you did not. If you didn't get it downloaded, it is also, again, under this particular webinar on the Florida IPDAY website. But I just want to take a quick look with you of what is here. We talked briefly that there's guiding questions. Those are the kinds of things you can look at. So if you're viewing this webinar later, it can guide you through the webinar. You also have just a sheet which you may wish to use with your students that identifies purpose, point of view, and tone, and provides some basic information here for your students to use or for you to use within lessons. The next thing you'll see are a list of words to describe tone, gotten from Brian Zabnik, and he did a great job of some basic tone words with definitions. But if you like just words, here's a list of tone words. Positive, they're divided by positive, neutral, and negative. Remember, students don't have to memorize these, but they are great resources to give your students when they're reading through materials. Same way with mood words, positive mood words, negative mood words. This definitely aren't all the words out there, but it gives your students, again, a list to get started. We were talking about point of view questions for you as a teacher. If you wonder, what should I be asking? Here's a great list of 36 questions to get your brain going. So as you're teaching point of view, you can assess different levels of skills, from the knowledge level, again, all the way through synthesis and evaluation. Quick little idea to teach point of view in the classroom, a fun little activity that you may wish to try with your students. But one other thing, Florida IPDAY is working right now on not only aligning materials, but creating some materials for your classroom that align with all the standards on the new TABE in 11 and 12. So what you're going to be seeing coming your way are mini lessons as well as resource activities, each of them connected to a specific standard and a specific NRS level. So here's an idea for your classroom on what's the author's tone that covers level 4 reading in the domain area of craft and structure. And it provides you with guided practice to use with your students, as well as some modifications to the activity, some reference materials, of course the answer key, and some handouts to use that your students, again, can practice on author's tone. The reason I wanted to show you this is, again, a lot of these types of things will be coming your way very quickly as the matrices for the standards of the TABE come forth. So coming soon will be additional resource activities aligned to the TABE 11 and 12. Beside just the math matrices, the reading matrices and the language arts matrices will also be completed. And this year alone, we will have one more webinar on some reading skills called figurative language. And then at the end of this particular school year, we're going to highlight some of the things that are being added and that are coming forth. So, having said that, questions, comments?
Bonnie, that activity book that you prepared for this webinar is excellent. So, you know, they were not able to see everything in that book, but please dive into that activity book. It's really some great things that Bonnie explained there.
Other questions or comments? Thank you, June. If not, I want to thank you very much for being with me today. And before we leave, I believe June has one little thing that she does need to do with you.
Thank you so much, Bonnie. You know, we love to hear your feedback, so it's really important to us. You'll see these 3 questions that are going to appear on the screen. Take a few minutes, just actually 1 minute, and answer these 3 questions. We'd love to hear what you thought of this webinar today. And while you're doing that, I'll just remind you of the next webinar, which will be on March 13th. Here we're going to talk about strategies for integrating the Compass 100 requirements into everyday academic lessons. This is a webinar that's really specific to those of you who are serving in a correction facility. So it's a part 2 webinar hosted by the Department of Corrections. So until then, we wish all of you a great rest of the day, and thank you again for joining us. And thank you again, Bonnie, for your great presentation. We appreciate it.